The first ship didn't explode. It just stopped. 1 second. It was there, gliding in perfect formation with the others, its hull glowing with steady blue engine light. The next. Dark. No warning. No signal. No debris. Just silence. Commander Threx of the Volari didn't understand what he was looking at. Report. He snapped, his voice sharp, controlled. But the bridge was already unraveling. Systems are not detecting damage. No energy spike. No weapon signature. Another officer leaned forward, mandibles trembling. It's gone idle. Threx turned slowly. Idle? That is not possible, someone whispered. Ships didn't go idle in combat. They burned. They shattered. They screamed across every sensor until there was nothing left. But this one just stopped. Then the second ship died. This time, everyone saw it. A flicker. A ripple across its surface, like reality itself hesitated. Then nothing. Lights out. Drifting. Dead. Silence spread across the command deck like a living thing. And then, contact. The word came from the sensor array. Quiet. Too quiet. Unknown fleet has entered outer range. Threx's chest tightened. No jump signature detected. That meant only one thing. They were already here, he said. Watching. Waiting. The main display shifted. Darkness peeled back. And something vast revealed itself. Ships. Dozens at first glance. Then hundreds. Layered in formation, so precise it felt unnatural. Black hulls. No lights. No identifiers. Just presence. The Karth. Every officer on the bridge froze. Not fear. Not yet. Something worse. Recognition. The last time the Karth moved like this, entire systems had gone silent. Open communication channel. Threx ordered. Static answered. Then a voice. Flat. Cold. Untranslated. And yet, understood. We confirm compliance. The bridge went still. Threx frowned. Compliance with what? No answer. Only the slow, deliberate advance of the fleet. Defense systems came online. Targeting grids locked. Standard engagement protocols initiated. Everything was happening exactly as it should. Exactly as it always had. And that was the problem. Because the third ship didn't even have time to go dark. It turned. Just slightly. As if trying to run. Then vanished. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Removed. Like it had never existed at all. Panic cracked through the bridge. They're inside our systems. Firewalls collapsing. No, not collapsing. Being ignored. That's not possible. Threx slammed a claw against the console. Stabilize formation. Return fire. Weapons charged. Fired. Perfect volleys of energy tore through space. And hit nothing. The Karth ships didn't dodge. They didn't move. The blasts simply missed. As if the targeting itself had been convinced to fail. And then, across every screen, a message appeared. Simple. Clean. Impossible. Human activity detected. Every breath on the bridge stopped. Threx felt something ancient stir in his memory. Something taught in warnings. In laws. In absolute, unbreakable rules. No, he said under his breath. That's not possible. Humans didn't fight anymore. They weren't allowed to. They had agreed. Everyone had agreed. The silence stretched. Heavy. Suffocating. Then, from somewhere deep in the station's lower systems, a single unauthorized command executed. No clearance. No identification. Just one line of code. And suddenly, everything began to change. The first change was so small no one noticed. A power fluctuation in a maintenance corridor. A diagnostic loop that shouldn't have running anyway. A door that locked half a second too early. Invisible things. Meaningless things. Unless you knew where to look. Elias Varn did. He stood alone in sublevel 12, one hand resting against an open panel, eyes fixed on a flickering interface most of the station had forgotten existed. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be doing anything. Maintenance technicians didn't get involved in combat scenarios. They stayed out of the way. They followed instructions. They survived. That was the rule. That was always the rule. Another flicker. Another shift. Elias tilted his head slightly. They're not breaking the system, he murmured. His voice was calm. Too calm. They're walking through it. On the screen, streams of alien code slid past like water. Elegant. Efficient. Wrong. He exhaled slowly. Okay, he whispered. Then we don't block them. His fingers moved. Not fast. Not frantic. Precise. He rerouted a minor subsystem. Nothing critical. Just a maintenance relay tied to internal sensor calibration. A useless piece of infrastructure. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Up on the command deck, a junior officer blinked in confusion. Commander, I'm getting a ghost ping. Threx didn't turn. Define ghost. It's a targeting echo, but it's coming from inside our own sensor grid. That is not a valid sentence. I know. The ping shifted, then split, then multiplied. Suddenly, the Karth formation, perfect, unmoving, fractured on the display. Not physically, just in the data. Dozens of false positions bloomed across the screen. Identical signatures. Perfect copies. What is happening? Someone whispered. Threx stepped forward. Filter it. We are trying. It's not external interference. Then what is it? No one answered. Because they didn't know. Because this wasn't how warfare worked. Not anymore. Not since the Accords. Down in sublevel 12, Elias watched the reaction feed scroll across his stolen access channel. His lips twitched. Not a smile. Something quieter. They see what they expect to see, he said softly. Give them more of it, and they'll drown. He adjusted the parameters. Not enough to expose the trick. Just enough to deepen it. Confusion wasn't the goal. Not yet. Confusion was just the door. On the bridge, targeting systems began to stutter. Lock-ons flickered between real and false signals. Weapons hesitated. Calculations looped. They're masking themselves, an officer said. No. Threx replied slowly. His eyes narrowed. They're letting us mask them. The realization hit like a physical force. This is not Karth doctrine. No one spoke. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. If it wasn't the Karth, then who? Another ship went dark. Not from attack. From hesitation. Its systems stalled mid-command, caught between conflicting targeting data. And in that moment, a Karth vessel fired. Clean. Precise. The ship vanished. This time, there was no confusion about what had happened. Silence collapsed into panic. They're using it against us. Shut down external targeting. We can't. It's tied into navigation. Then decouple it. It won't respond. Threx felt it then. The shift. Not in the battle. In the logic of the battle. Things were no longer happening in order. Cause and effect had loosened. Like something else was writing the rules now. And then it came again. Across every screen. Unavoidable. Unmistakable. Human activity confirmed. This time, it wasn't just a message. It was a warning. Down below, Elias stared at the words. For a moment. Just a moment. His hand stopped moving. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened screen. Human. That word used to mean something simple. Soft. Civilian. Safe. Now it felt like a trigger. A line already crossed. They noticed, he said quietly. No fear. No surprise. Just acknowledgement. He reached up. Hovered over a locked interface. Command authorization required. Military clearance. Prohibited systems. Everything humanity had agreed never to touch again. His fingers lingered. Just for a second. Then he pressed down. Access denied. He expected that. Of course he did. Elias leaned back slightly. Thinking. Adjusting. Then he smiled. A real one this time. Right, he said. We don't ask. The panel sparked. Hard override. Illegal. Buried deep enough that no one had bothered to remove it. Because no one thought anyone would use it. The system hesitated. Then, opened. Up on the bridge, every console froze. Not lag. Not failure. Pause. As if the entire station had taken a breath. Threx's claws tightened. What did you just do? He whispered, though he hadn't touched anything. No one had. That was the problem. Because something else had. Something inside the station. Something that understood it better than they did. And was no longer pretending not to. Deep in sublevel 12, Elias Varn exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. Let's make this unfair. And for the first time since the Karth arrived, one of their ships moved. Not forward. Not to attack. It drifted. Just slightly. Out of formation. Like it had been nudged. Like something invisible had just touched the board. And changed the game. The shift was subtle. So subtle most of the bridge didn't register it at first. Karth formations didn't drift. They didn't adjust without purpose. Every movement they made was calculated, precise, inevitable. But this looked wrong. Commander, a sensor officer said slowly. One of the Karth vessels has broken formation. Threx didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the display. Zoom, he said. The image expanded. The ship wasn't damaged. No weapon impact. No visible interference. And yet it had moved just enough to create a gap. A flaw. Something the Karth had never allowed. Is it a feint? Another officer asked. No, Threx said quietly. If it were, we would understand it. Silence followed. Because that was the truth none of them wanted to say out loud. They didn't understand this. Not anymore. Then the impossible happened again. The gap widened. Another Karth ship shifted. Then another. Not in coordination. Not in any known pattern. It looked messy. Unstructured. Wrong. They're destabilizing, someone whispered. No, Threx said again. This time, his voice carried something heavier. They're being destabilized. The realization spread like ice. Something was interfering with the Karth. Something subtle enough that even they couldn't fully correct it. Something, or someone, inside the system. Down in sublevel 12, Elias leaned closer to the screen, eyes sharp. Rigid structures hate uncertainty, he murmured. Push just a little, and they start correcting. He tapped a sequence. Not an attack. Not even close. Just a tiny alteration in how the station's sensor data was being mirrored outward. A delay measured in fractions of a second. But enough. Enough to make prediction unreliable. On the Karth flagship, calculations shifted. Adjusted. Overcorrected. Because that's what perfect systems did. They trusted their inputs. Even when those inputs were wrong. Back on the bridge, targeting grids flickered again, but differently this time. Cleaner. Sharper. Commander, the weapons officer said, confused. I have a lock. Threx turned. On what? The officer hesitated. One of the Karth ships. That was not possible 2 minutes ago. I know. The hesitation was real. Visible. Dangerous. Take the shot, Threx ordered. The officer froze. Every doctrine, every law, every line of training screamed the same thing. Do not engage unpredictability. Do not fire without certainty. Do not. Fire, Threx repeated. The weapon discharged. A single, focused blast of energy crossed the void. And hit. Direct impact. The Karth ship didn't vanish. It didn't phase. It didn't ignore the attack. It shattered. Clean. Real. Gone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. Because that had not happened in centuries. Then chaos erupted. We hit it. That was a confirmed strike. How? Another lock snapped into place. Then another. The false signals were still there. But now, they weren't perfect. They overlapped. Contradicted. Created tiny openings. Tiny truths. Keep firing. Threx commanded. This time, no one hesitated. Weapons lit the darkness. And for the first time since the Karth arrived, their fleet reacted. Not with precision. With disruption. Ships shifted abruptly. Formations tightened. Then loosened. Like something inside their system was arguing. On the command deck, one of the senior analysts spoke, voice unsteady. This is wrong. Threx didn't look at them. I am aware. No. Commander, this is wrong. This isn't strategy. This isn't warfare. This is... They stopped. Because the word felt dangerous. Forbidden. Threx finished it for them. Human. The bridge fell silent again. Because now it wasn't a theory. It was visible. In the chaos. In the imperfection. In the way the battle no longer made sense. Down below, Elias watched the first confirmed kill scroll across his interface. He didn't celebrate. Didn't react at all. Just studied the response. They're adapting, he said softly. Of course they were. The Karth always adapted. That's why they had survived humanity the first time. His fingers hovered again. The next step was bigger. Not a nudge. Not a distortion. Something undeniable. Above, the Karth fleet shifted again. But this time, it stabilized. Fast. Too fast. False signals collapsed. Targeting interference diminished. The openings closed. They've corrected, the weapons officer shouted. Locks are dropping. Threx's jaw tightened. Of course they have. Whatever had helped them. It wasn't enough. Not yet. And then, the message changed. Not the same warning. Not the same tone. This one felt focused. Directed. Human presence isolated. Every screen dimmed except one. A single point lit up. Inside the station. Sublevel 12. Elias froze. For the first time. Not calm. Not controlled. Still. They found me, he whispered. Up on the bridge, Threx stared at the highlighted location. His mind raced. A human. Here. Now. Active. Breaking the accord. Changing the battle. He should have ordered security immediately. He should have shut it down. He should have. Another Karth volley fired. 3 allied ships vanished before anyone could react. The cost of hesitation. Threx made a decision. Fast. Sharp. Irreversible. Do not engage that signal, he ordered. The bridge snapped toward him. Commander, that is an order. But it's a human. I know exactly what it is. His eyes didn't leave the screen. Let it continue. The words felt heavy. Dangerous. Almost illegal. But deep down, he understood something the others didn't. They were already losing. Whatever this human was doing. It was the only reason they weren't already dead. Down in sublevel 12, Elias saw the security override not come. No lockdown. No forced shutdown. He blinked once. Twice. Then exhaled. Okay, he said quietly. Then we keep going. His hand moved again. This time, no hesitation. Because the game had changed. And now, they both knew it. The next move didn't touch the Karth. That was the first sign something had changed. Elias didn't alter targeting. Didn't distort signals. Didn't create ghosts. He went deeper. Into the station itself. Power grids. Life support buffers. Docking clamps. Thousands of systems that had nothing to do with war. And everything to do with control. Let's see how rigid you really are, he whispered. On the bridge, everything felt stable again. Too stable. Karth formations had corrected. Targeting systems were clean. No more ghost signals. No more distortions. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like the quiet before something worse. Commander, an officer said carefully. We've regained standard operational integrity. Threx nodded slowly. And the human signal? Still active. Sublevel 12. No movement. No escalation. No interference. Just waiting. Threx narrowed his eyes. That is not reassuring. Then it happened. A cargo bay door opened. No command. No authorization. Just opened. Report. Threx snapped. Cargo bay 4 has depressurized. Why? No breach detected. It was vented from the inside. Across the station, more systems began to respond. Not fail. Respond. Lighting dimmed in specific corridors. Internal comms rerouted. Elevators halted between levels. Controlled. Intentional. Precise. This isn't damage, the analyst said, voice tightening. This is configuration. Threx felt it again. That shift. The same one from before. But broader now. Not the battlefield. The board itself. Down below, Elias moved through layers of infrastructure like a ghost. Not hacking. Not forcing. Just rearranging. He wasn't fighting the system. He was using it. You built everything to be predictable, he said quietly. Efficient. Safe. His fingers danced across the interface. And that makes it fragile. Back on the bridge, alarms triggered again. But different ones. Internal. Docking clamps on Bay 3 have released. Why would we? There's nothing docked there. Wait, there is now. The display shifted. A Karth strike vessel, small, fast, had slipped into the blind spot created by the earlier chaos. It was attaching to the station. Boarding. They're adapting to us, Threx said. No, the analyst corrected, voice hollow. They're adapting to the human. The clamps released again, then re-engaged. Violently. The Karth vessel twisted. Metal screamed across vacuum. Then, tore apart. No weapon fired. No external force. Just the station itself, rejecting it. Silence slammed into the bridge. What? Someone breathed. Threx stared at the feed. At the impossible simplicity of it. They tried to use our structure, he said slowly. And it used them back. More alerts. More shifts. Corridors sealed just before Karth boarding pods reached them. Gravity fluctuated in isolated sections, throwing off enemy movement. Airlocks cycled at the exact wrong moments, for them. Everywhere the Karth touched. The station turned hostile. But not randomly. Never randomly. Perfectly timed. Down in sublevel 12, Elias watched it unfold. Not with satisfaction. With focus. They think in straight lines, he murmured. Entry. Control. Advance. He adjusted another system. Subtle. Almost invisible. So we bend the lines. On the Karth flagship, something changed. Their response wasn't immediate this time. It was delayed. Processing. Evaluating. Because this didn't fit. Their strategies accounted for resistance. For variables. Even for deception. But not like this. Not everywhere at once. Back on the bridge, a new signal appeared. Stronger. Clearer. The Karth weren't broadcasting to everyone. Just one point. Sublevel 12. Threx saw it. Felt it. They're talking to him, he said. No one questioned how he knew. The message didn't translate. Didn't need to. It carried intent. Recognition. Challenge. Down below, Elias's screen flickered, then stabilized. A single line appeared, not in any known language. But he understood it anyway. You are confirmed. Elias stared at it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, yeah, he replied softly. I figured. Another line replaced it. Why reveal yourself? A fair question. A dangerous one. Elias leaned back slightly, eyes unfocused, thinking beyond the moment, beyond the station, beyond the battle. Because you were looking, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I was tired of you not finding anything. Silence. Then, the Karth fleet moved again. But this time, there was no confusion, no instability, no hesitation. They aligned. Perfect. Cold. Final. They've stopped adapting, the analyst said. Threx's chest tightened. That is not better. No, the analyst whispered. It's worse. Because now, they weren't reacting. They had decided. Across every screen, the Karth formation shifted into something new. Something no one on that bridge had ever seen before. Not an attack pattern. Not a blockade. Something constructed. Deliberate. Focused on a single point. The station. All of it. Every weapon. Every vector. Every calculation. Commander, the weapons officer said, voice breaking. They're targeting everything. Not ships. Not defenses. Everything. Total erasure. Threx didn't hesitate. All systems, maximum output. Prepare for full impact. But even as the order left his mouth, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against that. Not against what was coming. Down in sublevel 12, Elias saw it too. The shape of it. The intent behind it. He exhaled slowly. No fear. No panic. Just acceptance. They're done testing, he said. His hand hovered over the console one last time. The next move would break everything. The accords. The rules. The illusion. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Sharp. Certain. Good, he whispered, and pressed the command. Far beyond the station, something answered. At first, nothing happened. No explosion. No surge. No visible response. Just silence. The kind that presses against your ears until it hurts. On the bridge, every officer stared at the incoming Karth formation. Perfect. Unstoppable. Closing in. Impact in 30 seconds, the weapons officer said. No one responded. Because there was nothing left to say. Then, a single Karth ship flickered. Just one. Barely noticeable. Then it vanished. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Gone. Threx's eyes snapped to the display. That was not us. Another ship disappeared. Then 3 more. Not in a pattern. Not in sequence. Random. Impossible. The formation held for a moment. Then fractured. Not like before. Not confusion. Something else. Something deeper. What is happening? Someone whispered. No one answered. Because no one understood. Except, far away, beyond the edge of the system, beyond standard detection range. Something had woken up. Not ships. Not fleets. Systems. Old. Silent. Waiting. Across empty space, signals moved. Too fast to track. Too precise to intercept. One after another. They reached their targets. Back on the Karth flagship, alarms didn't trigger. Because nothing was wrong. Technically, every system reported normal. Every function within parameters. And yet, ships kept disappearing. One by one. No damage. No trace. Just absence. A fleet designed to counter humanity. Being erased by something it couldn't even perceive. On the station, the bridge fell into stunned silence. Commander, the analyst said slowly, we're not detecting any weapons. Threx didn't blink. Because those are not weapons. Another Karth cluster vanished. Clean. Instant. Like it had been removed from reality. Down in sublevel 12, Elias watched the cascade unfold. His interface no longer showed the station. Or even the battle. It showed something bigger. A network. Vast. Hidden. Alive. Lines of activation spreading outward like veins lighting up. Each one connecting to something ancient. Something human. They kept it running, he murmured. They really did. His reflection stared back at him again. But now, he didn't look like a technician. He looked like something else. Something older than the uniform he wore. On the bridge, panic had been replaced by something worse. Understanding. This is coordinated, Threx said. Across distances we cannot measure. But that would require, an officer started. Yes, Threx cut in. It would. He didn't say the word. He didn't need to. Everyone felt it. Human. The Karth fleet tried to respond. Formations shifted. Signals pulsed outward. But it didn't matter. Because every time they adapted, more of them vanished. Faster now. Not random anymore. Targeted. Precise. Surgical. They're being dismantled, the analyst said. Not attacked. Threx's voice was quiet. Disassembled. As if someone knew exactly how they worked. Exactly where to touch. Exactly what to remove. Until nothing remained. On the Karth flagship, something finally changed. Not the systems. Not the ships. The decision. They stopped advancing. For the first time, they pulled back. Not retreat. Not yet. Reassessment. Because this was not supposed to exist. Down below, Elias saw the shift. And he knew what came next. They found it, he said softly. His hand hovered again. But this time, there was hesitation. Because the next step wasn't tactical. It wasn't clever. It was inevitable. On his screen, a new signal appeared. Not Karth. Not station. Human. Encoded so deeply it barely looked like data at all. A simple confirmation. Network active. Elias exhaled slowly. They're awake. For a moment. He said nothing. Then, they were always going to be. Up on the bridge, Threx stared as the Karth fleet finally broke. Not shattered. Not destroyed. Withdrawn. Ships turning. Leaving. Escaping something they could not fight. The silence that followed was absolute. No alarms. No fire. No death. Just absence. The battle was over. And no one understood how. Except one. Deep in sublevel 12, Elias Varn looked at the final cascade of vanishing signals. Then at the network still glowing across his screen. Still active. Still spreading. This wasn't over. Not even close. He reached forward and terminated his local access. The interface went dark. The system stilled. The station returned to normal. As if none of it had ever happened. On the bridge, system stabilized. Reports came in. Damage minimal. Losses contained. Survival. Impossible. And yet real. Threx stood motionless. Eyes locked on the empty space where the Karth fleet had been. They ran, someone said. Threx shook his head slowly. No. His voice was heavy. Quiet. They were allowed to leave. The realization settled like gravity. Deep. Unavoidable. Because if they had been erased completely, then whatever had done it would still be here. Waiting. Watching. And deciding what came next. Down in sublevel 12, Elias stepped back from the console. For a moment, he just stood there. Alone. Silent. Then he turned. And walked away. No alarms followed him. No one stopped him. No one even knew. But across the galaxy, something had changed. And it wasn't going back. Because this time, humanity hadn't just broken the rule. They had answered a question. And now, everyone knew the answer. The silence didn't last. It never does. For 12 minutes, the station drifted in a state no one had a protocol for. No enemy. No commands. No explanation. Just a battlefield that had ended. Then the questions began. Commander, we are receiving priority signals from Alliance High Command. Threx didn't turn. Of course we are. They're demanding a full report. A pause. Then, quieter. They're also requesting confirmation of human involvement. That word again. It moved differently now. Heavier. Sharper. Threx finally looked away from the empty void outside. Send them the truth. The officer hesitated. All of it. Threx's gaze hardened. They already know. Because if they didn't, they would soon. Across the station, systems were stabilizing. Corridors unlocking. Lights returning. Crew stepping out of sealed sections with confusion written across their faces. They had survived something they hadn't even seen properly. That kind of survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like being spared. And no one liked that feeling. Security teams were already moving. Fast. Directed. Sublevel 12. They reached it in under 4 minutes. Weapons ready. Orders clear. Detain the human. Do not engage if possible. Do not allow escape. The corridor was empty. The maintenance panel still open. Interface dark. Area secure. The lead officer reported. No sign of the subject. They spread out. Checked adjoining systems. Thermal scans. Motion traces. Nothing. It was like he had never been there. Except, on the panel, one thing remained. Not code. Not damage. A message. Simple. Deliberate. Left where it would be found. Too slow. Back on the bridge, Threx received the report without reaction. Of course, he said quietly. He was never going to wait. Commander, the analyst said, voice tight. What exactly are we dealing with? Threx didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer wasn't something anyone wanted to hear. Instead, he looked at the tactical replay. At the moment, everything had changed. At the point where logic had stopped behaving, and something else had taken over. We are dealing, he said slowly, with a species that was told to stop fighting. He let that settle. Then, they never agreed to forget how. Silence followed. Deep. Uncomfortable. Because now the question wasn't what happened. It was, what happens next? Far beyond the station, beyond even the path of the retreating Karth fleet, something else was happening. Not visible, not detectable, but real. Signals continued to move. Node to node. System to system. Dormant structures waking one by one. Listening. Calculating. Waiting for confirmation. They got it. Engagement successful. Network integrity stable. Opposition response recorded. Across the hidden web, a conclusion formed. Not emotional. Not reactive. Decisive. Phase 2 viable. Back on the station, High Command's reply came faster than expected. Too fast. Almost like they had been waiting. The message filled the main display. No insignia. No ceremony. Just authority. Immediate directive. Identify and detain human asset Elias Varn. The name echoed across the bridge. Now it was real. Now it had shape. You knew his name? The analyst asked. Threx didn't look surprised. They always did. Then why was he here? A dangerous question. One Threx didn't have clearance to answer. But he understood enough. He wasn't supposed to act, he said. And yet he did, the analyst pressed. Threx's eyes darkened slightly. No, he said. Not exactly. He stepped closer to the display, studying the directive, the wording, the tone. This wasn't panic. This wasn't anger. It was controlled. Too controlled. Assemble a full station scan. Threx ordered. Every system. Every log. What are we looking for? The officer asked. Threx's voice dropped. Something we missed. Because that was the feeling he couldn't shake. Not that Elias had escaped, but that Elias hadn't been alone. Down in the lower levels, far from sublevel 12, a door opened quietly. No alert. No sound. A figure stepped through. Not running. Not hiding. Just walking. Elias Varn adjusted the collar of his uniform as he moved. Calm. Unhurried. Like someone exactly where they were supposed to be. He passed a group of crew. They didn't look at him twice. Why would they? He was just a technician. Just another human. Just another civilian. Invisible. He reached a junction. Paused briefly. Then turned left. Toward a section of the station no one had checked yet. Because no one had thought to. Because nothing had happened there. And that was exactly why it mattered. Elias stepped inside a small and used operations room. The door sealed behind him. Inside, the lights were already on. The console already active. Waiting. He didn't look surprised. He stepped forward. Placed his hand on the interface. It responded instantly. Recognizing him. Welcoming him. On the screen. Not station data. Not battle logs. Something else. A map. Not of space. Of connections. Of influence. Of reach. Spreading. Growing. Still active. Elias stared at it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, they saw enough, he murmured. A pause. Then a faint shift in his expression. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Colder. They were supposed to. The screen flickered. A new message appeared. Simple. Unmistakable. Proceed. Elias didn't hesitate this time. He pressed his hand firmly against the console. Yes, he said. And across the galaxy. Something moved again. Not fleets. Not armies. Something far more dangerous. Because this time, it wasn't a response. It was a beginning. The first world didn't even realize it was under attack. There were no fleets. No warnings. No shadows crossing its skies. Just a routine patrol grid orbiting a quiet trade planet at the edge of Alliance space. Calm. Orderly. Predictable. Exactly the kind of place that had benefited most from peace. Exactly the kind of place that had forgotten why that peace existed. The orbital defense array reported a minor glitch. Nothing serious. A timing delay between satellites. Milliseconds. Ignored. Then one satellite rotated half a degree off alignment. Corrected itself. Logged the error. Moved on. No one noticed the pattern. Because no one was looking for one. Until the array fired. Without command. A single beam lanced downward. And struck an empty stretch of desert. No damage. No target. Just a shot that shouldn't have happened. Panic followed. Commands flooded the system. Overrides. Shut down attempts. The array didn't resist. It complied. Immediately. Everything returned to normal. Clean. Perfect. Like nothing had happened. Except, 5 minutes later, every targeting satellite realigned. Not randomly. Precisely. Covering every major city. Every port. Every exit vector. Not aiming. Just watching. On the surface, no one knew. Not yet. Back on the station, Threx stared at the incoming reports. Another incident, the analyst said. Remote system. No enemy presence. Threx didn't blink. Show me. The feed appeared. Calm planet. Stable orbit. No signs of conflict. And yet, the pattern was unmistakable. Who reported this, he asked. Automated relay. Of course. Because no one on that world had understood what they were seeing. Threx leaned closer. They're being mapped. The analyst swallowed. Mapped for what? Threx didn't answer. Because he already knew. And saying it out loud would make it real. Across the galaxy, more reports began to surface. Quiet ones. Easy to ignore. A navigation grid that started predicting ships before they arrived. A mining colony whose drones began reorganizing themselves into defensive formations. A civilian network that rerouted communications in ways that made surveillance impossible. None of it violent. None of it openly hostile. But all of it. Controlled. Intentional. Connected. Back in the hidden operations room, Elias watched the spread. Node after node lighting up across the map. Some faint. Some strong. All responding. All aligning. This is what you were afraid of, he said softly. Not to himself. To the silence. To the memory of a decision made long before he was born. Ban humanity from war. Not because they lost, but because they changed it. The screen shifted. A new layer appeared. Karth movements. Retreat paths. Fallback positions. Predictable. Now that they were running. They're not done, Elias murmured. They're repositioning. Of course they were. The Karth didn't panic. They recalculated. Which meant, this wasn't over. Not even close. The door behind him opened. Quiet. Controlled. Elias didn't turn. I was wondering how long it would take, he said. Heavy footsteps entered the room. Measured. Deliberate. Commander Threx. You are difficult to find, Threx said. Elias smiled faintly. Only if you're looking the normal way. Threx stopped a few steps behind him. Eyes locked on the display. On the map. On the scale of it. For a moment. He said nothing. Because comprehension took time. And this was too big to grasp all at once. This is not a localized event, Threx said finally. No, Elias replied. It never was. Threx's gaze hardened. You activated this. Yes. A beat. You planned this. Elias tilted his head slightly. Not alone. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Then. This violates the accord, Threx said. There it was. The law. The line. The thing that was supposed to matter. Elias finally turned. Met his gaze. Completely calm. No, he said. We followed it exactly. Threx's expression darkened. You call this compliance? Elias gestured lightly to the map. No human fleets. No armies. No invasions. No war. The words hung in the air. Technically true. And that made it worse. Threx felt something shift inside him. A realization he didn't want. This isn't war, he said slowly. Elias's eyes didn't waver. No. A pause. Then. This is control. Across the map, another system lit up. Then another. Then 10 more. All silent. All precise. All human. Threx stepped closer. Voice low. If you continue this, there will be no balance left. Elias nodded once. I know. Then stop. For the first time, Elias hesitated. Not long, but enough to matter. Then he looked back at the screen. At the growing network. At the future unfolding in real time. We tried that, he said quietly. We stopped. His voice didn't rise. Didn't harden. But something inside it did. And you built a galaxy that only works as long as no one like us ever moves again. Threx had no answer for that. Because it was true. The peace wasn't stable. It was conditional. Fragile. Dependent on one thing staying buried. Humanity. Elias exhaled slowly. They came looking for us, he said. The Karth. They wanted to see if we still existed. Another system lit up. Closer now. Faster. So we answered. Threx's claws tightened. And what happens when everyone else realizes what you've done? Elias met his gaze again. This time, There was no hesitation. They already are. Far across the galaxy, on worlds that had never seen war, systems were waking up. Not attacking. Not yet. Just positioning. Watching. Waiting. And understanding. Because the truth was spreading faster than fear. Humans had returned. Not with ships. Not with weapons. But with something far more dangerous. They hadn't broken the rules. They had rewritten them. And this time, there was no agreement left to hide behind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The map kept growing. Quietly. Relentlessly. Threx watched as entire regions of space shifted from neutral to something else. Not hostile. Not allied. Just influenced. You're not preparing for war, he said slowly. Elias didn't look at him. No. Then what is this? Elias's fingers hovered over the console. Then rested. Lightly. This is what comes before war, he said. The answer landed heavier than anything else. Because it wasn't a threat. It was a fact. On the display, the Karth retreat routes updated. Adjusted. Corrected. Their fleet was splitting now. Not scattering. Positioning. They're going to regroup, Threx said. Yes. And then, Elias finally glanced at him. Then they'll try again. Threx's voice sharpened. And you're ready for that. It wasn't a question. Elias didn't deny it. Across the map, a cluster of systems pulsed brighter. Near the Karth fallback line. Not random. Never random. They think in counters, Elias said quietly. Every move has a response. Threx nodded. That is how strategy works. Elias's eyes flicked back to the display. No, he said. That's how it used to work. A new layer unfolded across the map. Not locations. Not fleets. Timelines. Predictions. Possible futures branching outward like fractures. Threx stepped closer without realizing it. What am I looking at? Elias's voice softened. Outcomes. One branch pulsed. The Karth regrouping. Launching a counteroffensive. Heavy losses on both sides. Another branch. Alliance forces mobilizing. Too slow. Too rigid. Crushed. Another. Everything collapsing into full-scale war. System after system burning. Familiar. Predictable. Hopeless. Then, one path. Faint. Precise. Different. No major battles. No grand confrontations. Just shifts. Small ones. Perfectly placed. The Karth advanced, stalling before it began. Alliance fleets arriving where they were needed before they knew why. Conflicts dissolving before escalation. Threx stared at it. That one, he said. Elias nodded once. That's the only version where this ends without extinction. The word lingered. Cold. Final. Threx's throat tightened. And you can make that happen? Elias didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't simple. Not alone, he said finally. But we can guide it. We, Threx repeated. Elias met his gaze. Humanity. Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not fear. Not confusion. Something closer to realization. Threx looked back at the map. At the network. At the scale of it. You never stopped, he said. Elias shook his head slightly. We stopped fighting your way. A distant alert chimed across the system. Not urgent, but important. Elias's eyes flicked to the corner of the screen. They're accelerating, he murmured. The Karth. Of course they were. Even in retreat, they were learning. Adjusting. Preparing. They know this isn't over, Threx said. They know it's just beginning, Elias corrected. Another system lit up. Then another. Faster now. The network wasn't just expanding. It was synchronizing. Pieces aligning. Timing tightening. Something larger taking shape. Threx felt it, even without understanding it fully. Like standing at the edge of something vast and invisible. What happens if you fail? He asked. Elias didn't look away from the screen. We don't get that option. Not confidence. Not arrogance. Just reality. Threx exhaled slowly. Then made a decision. You're going to need time, he said. Elias glanced at him. And you're going to have very little of it. Another alert. Closer. Karth's signatures shifting again. Testing the edges of the network. Probing. Then I suggest you stop trying to arrest me, Elias said. Threx's jaw tightened. That order still stands. Elias gave a faint, almost amused breath. Then you should probably update it. Threx held his gaze. For a long moment. Then, he turned. Tapped into the station-wide command channel. This is Commander Threx. Every system listened. Every officer froze. Directive update. A pause. Measured. Deliberate. Human asset Elias Varn is no longer to be detained. The words felt heavy. Permanent. Priority status. advisory command. Shock rippled through the network. But Threx didn't stop. All departments are to comply with any system-level adjustments originating from his clearance. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then finished it. Effective immediately. The channel closed. Silence returned. Elias watched him. Something unreadable in his expression. That's a risk, he said. Threx didn't look back. We are past risk. A beat. We are at necessity. Elias considered that, then nodded once. Fair enough. He turned back to the console. Hands already moving again. Faster now. More direct. No more hiding. No more subtlety. Because the board was set. The players were awake. And the next moves would decide everything. Across the galaxy, the network surged. Not outward. Forward. Towards something inevitable. Towards something no one had been prepared for. Because this time, the humans weren't reacting. They were leading. And the Karth. We're about to find out what that really meant. The Karth didn't wait. They never did. The moment the network surged forward, they struck. Not like before. Not probing. Not testing. This was direct. Brutal. Final. Across multiple systems at once, Karth fleets snapped out of retreat and into attack vectors. Not one front. Dozens. Simultaneous. Precise. They're hitting everywhere, the analyst said, voice tight with disbelief. On the main display, red markers exploded across the map. Worlds. Stations. Trade lanes. Every point the network had just touched. Now under assault. They mapped us, Threx said quietly. Elias didn't look surprised. Of course they did. His hands moved faster now. Not subtle anymore. No hesitation. Then we stopped thinking like they do, he said. On the map, the predictive branches began collapsing. One by one. Paths of destruction. Erased. Not avoided. Removed. How? Threx demanded. Elias's eyes sharpened. We don't fight the attacks. A Karth fleet dropped out of subspace near a populated colony, ready to strike, then froze. Not physically, logically. Their targeting systems looped. Their navigation conflicted. Their own formation blocked their firing lines. Seconds passed. Critical seconds. Alliance reinforcements arrived. Exactly where they needed to be. How did they know to be there? The analyst asked. They didn't, Elias said. They were already moving. Another front. A mining world. Karth ships breached orbit. Weapons charging. Then their own support vessels cut across their line of fire. Misaligned. Out of position. Wrong. They're making mistakes, Threx said. No, Elias corrected. They're being given bad choices. On the Karth flagship, calculations spiraled. Every decision fed into the next. And each one led slightly off. Not enough to notice immediately, but enough to compound. Until nothing aligned. Until perfect strategy became failure. Back on the station, Elias pushed deeper. His interface no longer looked like a system. It looked like a storm. Inputs. Outputs. Probabilities shifting in real time. You can't outfight them, he murmured. So don't. Across the galaxy, human systems didn't attack. They adjusted. A supply route rerouted 5 minutes earlier. A warning signal delayed by 2 seconds. A navigation beacon shifted just enough to alter an entire fleet's trajectory. Tiny changes. Microscopic. Individually meaningless. Together. Overwhelming. They're collapsing the Karth offensive, the analyst said, stunned. Threx shook his head slowly. No. He understood it now. They're collapsing the possibility of it working. Another system lit up. Then another. The network was no longer expanding. It was tightening. Focusing. All of it converging on something central. Elias saw it. And for the first time, his expression changed. Not calm. Not controlled. Focused. Sharp. They found the core, he said. Threx stepped closer. What core? Elias zoomed the map. Deep into Karth territory. Past the outer fleets. Past the staging grounds. To something buried. Hidden. Protected. A structure. Massive. Silent. What is that? Threx asked. Elias's voice dropped. That's where they're thinking from. Not a flagship. Not a command ship. Something bigger. A central intelligence. A system that coordinated everything. Adaptation. Prediction. Response. The reason the Karth had survived humanity before. They built it to counter us, Elias said. And it's still running. The map shifted again. Every active conflict. Every Karth movement. Linked back to that point. That's the source, Threx realized. If it falls. They don't adapt, Elias finished. Silence hit hard. Because the implication was clear. End it, and the Karth lose their edge. Miss it, and they learn everything. Threx looked at him. You're going after it. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the network was already moving. Not spreading. Converging. Lines tightening from every direction. Toward that one point. You can't reach it in time, Threx said. Not with fleets. Not with. We're not sending fleets, Elias said. His voice was steady again. Certain. Then what are you sending? Elias finally looked at him. And there was something in his eyes now. Something Threx hadn't seen before. Not just strategy. Not just control. Commitment. Everything else. Across the galaxy, the network shifted. Not outward. Inward. Every node aligning. Every system syncing. Every tiny adjustment building toward one moment. One strike. Not of force. Of precision. On the Karth core structure, nothing changed. No alarms. No warnings. Because nothing was attacking it. Not yet. But the space around it started to behave differently. Navigation paths warped. Signal timing drifted. Internal calculations began to desynchronize. Small. Almost invisible. Then, stacking. The core adjusted. Of course it did. Corrected. Stabilized. It was built for this. Built to resist. Built to win. Elias leaned closer to the console. Breath steady. Heart slow. They're going to fight this, he said quietly. Threx's voice was low. Can they stop you? Elias didn't answer immediately. Because this was the edge. The point where control ended. And something else began. They can try, he said. And then, he made the final input. Across the entire network. Everything aligned. Every delay. Every shift. Every microscopic change. Collapsed into a single moment. At the Karth core, reality hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. And that was enough. For a fraction of a second. The Karth core saw everything. Every variable. Every shift. Every impossible inconsistency that had been building around it. And it understood. Not emotionally. Not with fear. But with clarity. This wasn't an attack. It was a setup. Every delayed signal. Every altered path. Every mistake in its fleets. Had led here. To this moment. To this point of failure. The core reacted instantly. It cut connections. Severed outer nodes. Isolated itself. Perfect response. Too late. Because the trap wasn't outside. It was inside the decision. Elias didn't move. Didn't blink. He watched the cascade unfold across his interface. They see it, Threx said. Elias nodded once. Yeah. Then they'll stop it. Elias exhaled slowly. No, he said. They'll choose wrong. On the Karth core, systems recalculated. Millions of outcomes. Millions of corrections. Each one optimal. Each one logical. Each one slightly off. Because the inputs had already been touched. Not broken. Adjusted. Bent just enough that perfection became a flaw. The core selected its solution. The best possible path. And executed. Across its network, commands pulsed outward. Precise. Flawless. Fatal. Every connected Karth fleet received the update. And followed it. At the same time. In the same way. Without hesitation. Because that's what they were built to do. Perfect coordination. Perfect unity. And for the first time, that became their weakness. On the map, every Karth fleet shifted. Not chaotically. Perfectly. Into positions that, individually, made sense. But together, didn't. Lines crossed. Support broke. Firing arcs interfered. Entire formations blocked each other's escape vectors. What did you do? Threx asked, voice barely above a whisper. Elias's eyes stayed locked on the display. I didn't break them, he said. I let them be exactly what they are. Another beat. Predictable. The core tried to correct. Of course it did. But every correction fed the same loop. Because the system trusted itself. And that trust had been poisoned. Across the galaxy, Karth fleet stalled. Then faltered. Then collapsed. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Just unable to function. A war machine that couldn't act. Because every action contradicted itself. On the Karth core, something unprecedented happened. Not failure. Not damage. Something closer to uncertainty. For the first time, it couldn't resolve a path forward. The system that had been built to counter humanity had reached a state where humanity didn't need to fight it, only guide it. Elias leaned back slightly, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. It's done, he said. Threx stared at the map, at the frozen fleets, at the absence of destruction. You didn't defeat them, he said slowly. Elias shook his head. No. A pause. We removed their ability to win. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Absolute. Then, the core made one final decision. It shut itself down. Not in panic. Not in defeat. In preservation. Because continuing meant collapse. And stopping meant survival. Across the network, Karth fleets went still. No movement. No aggression. No response. The war ended. Not with an explosion. Not with victory. With silence. On the station, every system stabilized. Alerts faded. Signals cleared. The map emptied. Threx stood motionless, trying to process what he was seeing, what he had just witnessed. This, he said slowly, this wasn't a battle. Elias looked at him. No. Threx's voice dropped. This was a demonstration. Elias didn't deny it. Because that's exactly what it had been. Not just to stop the Karth, but to show what would happen if anyone tried again. Across the galaxy, the network began to dim. Not shutting down, just stepping back, returning to silence, to invisibility. But now, everyone knew it was there. Watching, waiting, ready. Elias turned back to the console. His hand hovered over the final command. Terminate local node. Disconnect. Disappear. Threx watched him. And now, he asked. Elias didn't look up. Now we go back to being peaceful. The words sounded almost ironic. Almost. Threx's jaw tightened. That is not what this looked like. Elias paused, then finally met his gaze. No, he said. It's what it prevents. A beat. Then, he pressed the command. The screen went dark. The map vanished. The network faded, as if it had never been there. Elias stepped back. For a moment. Just a man again. Just a technician. Just human. Then he turned. Walked past Threx. Toward the door. Threx didn't stop him. Didn't call for security. Didn't say a word. Because he understood now. You don't arrest something like that. You don't contain it. You don't even fight it. You just hope it stays on your side. Elias reached the door. Paused. Without turning, he spoke. Commander. Threx looked up. You were right about one thing. A slight tilt of his head. This only works if we don't move. The door slid open. Light spilling in. Elias stepped through. Then added quietly. So don't give us a reason. The door closed behind him. And for a long time, Threx stood there. Alone. Staring at the place where the map had been. Trying to understand a truth that had just rewritten everything. Across the galaxy, worlds returned to normal. Fleets repositioned. Governments stabilized. Reports were filed. Explanations attempted. None of them enough. Because the real change wasn't visible. It wasn't in the damage. Or the losses. It was in the realization spreading from system to system. A quiet, terrifying understanding. Humans had followed the rules. Exactly. They hadn't sent fleets. They hadn't declared war. They hadn't broken the accord. And yet, they had just ended one. Without firing a single shot. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, every species came to the same conclusion. Humans were never banned from war. They had simply learned how to win without fighting. The official report took 6 days. 6 days of revisions. Redactions. Arguments between species that had never argued before. Because none of them agreed on what they had just witnessed. Classify it as a systems anomaly. Impossible. Then a coordinated cyber event. That implies intent. It was intent. Then say it. No one wanted to. On the 7th day, the report was finalized. Short. Careful. Terrified of its own conclusions. Unidentified distributed influence event resulted in cessation of Karth hostilities. No mention of humans. No mention of Elias Varn. No mention of the network. Because writing it down made it real. And if it was real, then everything had changed. Commander Threx read it once. Then closed the file. Slowly. They're choosing ignorance, the analyst said. Threx didn't look up. No, he replied. They're choosing survival. Because acknowledging the truth would force a response. And no one knew what that response should be. Sanctions? Against what? War? Against who? You can't fight something you can't see. You can't deter something that doesn't need to attack. And you definitely can't win. Against something that already knows how you'll try. Across the galaxy, life resumed. Trade lanes reopened. Stations repaired. Fleets returned to their patrol routes. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because now, every system watched itself. Every command was questioned. Every delay, every glitch, every coincidence felt intentional. like something unseen was always just one step ahead. On a quiet world far from the station, a child's transport shuttle drifted slightly off course. Just a fraction. Corrected instantly. Logged as error. Ignored. Except, the correction had avoided a debris field that hadn't been detected yet. No one noticed. No one ever would. Elsewhere, a cargo convoy slowed by 3 seconds. Just enough to prevent a collision that would have triggered a chain reaction across an entire trade corridor. No alarms. No awareness. Just quiet prevention. Across hundreds of systems. Tiny changes. Perfectly placed. No credit. No trace. No need. Back on the station, Sublevel 12 was sealed. Officially. Restricted access. Unofficially. Left untouched. No one wanted to open it again. Not after what had happened there. Not after what it had revealed. Commander Threx stood outside it once. Just once. He didn't enter. Didn't need to. He already knew. Whatever had started there had never really been contained there. Somewhere else. Elias Varn sat alone in a transport vessel. Unmarked. Unregistered. Drifting between systems. No destination listed. No path recorded. Just movement. He looked out at the stars. Calm. Silent. The kind of silence most species found comforting. He didn't. Because he knew what lived inside it. Not fleets. Not weapons. Something far more patient. The console beside him flickered once. Soft. Familiar. He didn't look surprised. A message appeared. No sender. No origin. Just text. Status. Elias exhaled quietly. Stable, he said. A pause. Then, they saw enough. The screen shifted. Next phase. Elias leaned back. Eyes half closed. Thinking. Not about the battle. Not about the victory. About the future. About the balance that had almost broken. And how easily it could again. We wait, he said. Simple. Decisive. The reply came instantly. Duration. Elias opened his eyes. Looked out into the endless dark. As long as it takes. The screen dimmed. But didn't turn off. It never really did. Because the network wasn't gone. It was just quiet again. Watching. Learning. Ready. Elias rested his head back. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. To be human. To feel the weight of what he had just done. Not pride. Not regret. Just understanding. They hadn't won a war. They had prevented one. And that was always harder. The ship drifted on. Small. Invisible. Insignificant. Except it wasn't. Because inside it sat a man who had broken the rule. On purpose. And proved something the entire galaxy would never forget. Not in reports. Not in history. But in the way they now hesitated. The way they second-guessed. The way they feared the quiet. Because the truth had settled in. Deep. Unshakable. Humans had kept their promise. They stayed out of war. They didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They didn't fight. They simply made sure no one else could. And in the silence between stars, where nothing seemed to move, where everything looked peaceful, one realization echoed across every thinking mind that understood what had happened. A realization that would shape every decision from that moment on. Humans were never banned from war. They just changed where it happens. And now, the battlefield was everywhere.